All of a sudden I've been pushed into becoming obsessed with 8 immortals. So I've been researching. Hey, I thought they were just some silly Chinese feudal superstition, so I never paid any attention to them. But
yeah, I kind of felt the same way.
I was forced to confront my ignorance and realize it was something that I needed to learn.
Wow.
And so for the last 2 weeks I've been intensely studying. I realized what hit me about it. One story about the 12 officials, and one of the major art objects you see, not the 12 officials. See, this is part of my problem, is that, and I think a lot of people at Inuit have been obsessed with 12 for a very long time. We think the whole Chinese cosmology revolves around 12, and 8 is a much bigger number, really, and we've all kind of been, or at least I certainly have been, ignorant about it. Particularly in regard to this group of 8. Now, because I've been so into the officials, one of the important things that I realized in the last 2 weeks is that the officials are about a bureaucracy, about a way that people can govern themselves, where there are checks and balances, and that you can work well with each other to govern a country or a group. The 8 immortals are really about something else, because they come out of the Bakwa, the 8 different trigrams, the 8 different ways in which change happens. Their leadership is questionable. Whether, you know, mostly it's said that Ludong Ben is their leader, but sometimes not. They use different people for different things. But the fact is, they all have extremely different abilities. They're very different people. They come from very different backgrounds. They all have a practice. A lot of them have been given that practice by Ludong Ben, but they all have like an internal alchemical practice that has transformed them into immortals. They're all kind of outsiders, heretics, anyway. But there's a certain circumstance in which they have to work together, and that is to get to the Penglai Island, which is the home of immortals, which is out in the off the coast of China. And by myth, it was, you know, like a better world. It was always springtime, and there were flowers, but there was fruit on the tree, and there were beautiful birds, and there was no poop anywhere, and everybody got along. It was a wonderful, wonderful place that only immortals could go to. But it was in rough enough seas that they couldn't go separately. So they made, by pooling their various abilities, they made a boat sail to the island of Penglai. So they had to learn to work together with their very, very different skills. And the fact that they were all by themselves immortals. They weren't dependent on other people. That image hit me like the title of one of the half a dozen most influential books in my life, which was Meetings with Remarkable Men, in which Gurdjieff was asked the question, did you meet any people of higher consciousness in your travels, and where did you get what you got? What remarkable men did you meet? And so he wrote this book of his, a bit autobiographical, in which he did not, other than his father and the dean of the grade school he went to, and his tutor when he was a young man, all the other people that he talked about were not gurus or teachers or people superior to him, but people that he worked with who were very different nationalities, very different abilities, but they all had this pulling, a craving for truth. And they called their group Seekers of Truth, and they had to figure out how to pool their talents and work together to go on to these expeditions to discover the Sarmong Brotherhood. It's the same damn image. So I got more interested in their different personalities, and also how they relate to the trigrams are a bit of a clue as to their meaning. The fact that they have a different trigram. Some of them have the same, but some of them have, most of them have different trigrams from the before heaven Bakwa and the after heaven Bakwa. This was a stumbling block last week because the fact is I never understood what the difference was or why there were two different ones. It was always one of these weird things that you hear. There's a before Bakwa and an after. as you can see on your screen, these were what triggered the whole thing. These were the 7 immortals advertised as going up for auction at the Aurora. Things that go up for auction there, I can actually go look at, which is not the same as buying stuff on eBay or traveling all over the country to look at stuff in case you might find something interesting. There are a number of carpets that are here that have been bought at the Aurora auction for way below market prices before people really caught on. More and more these days, though, they're having people caught on, and people, dealers, and people bidding up this stuff higher than I would ever think that it should go. But I was curious about this. It says bone carving, the 7 immortals. Well, in my experience, there was 8 immortals.
Right.
And I don't recognize any of them except the guy with a hat. I think that's Iron Crutch. But none of the others I really recognize. What I discovered is these are Japanese. The Japanese imported the 8 officials, but oftentimes are the immortals. Well, in my head, this is causing a kind of a major change in my consciousness to think in terms of 8 rather than 12. And the functions of the officials as opposed to what the immortals are. Anyway, I determined that these are Japanese, and when they imported them in, first of all, they made a Buddhist, and then they changed them all around. And so it's not reliable what you're going to see Japanese collections of immortals. These are the Chinese immortals. This is a nice painting because it's a clear illustration of the characteristics by which they can be identified, which is always important. You want to know who you're dealing with. One of the characteristics of the 8 immortals that is not common for immortals in general is that they're kind of into people. They're kind of into ordinary people. And they will interact and help regular folks, which is not generally what immortals do. It was considered in Chinese culture very wise to know the signs that they will present in order for you to recognize them. So I'm going to just run through them very quickly, and then we'll do each one in detail, and then we'll come back and see if you can identify all of them. Lu Dongbin, he's got a sword. He's the only one who carries a sword. Lu Dongbin always has a sword, and he looks like an official. Iron Crutch Lee, he's always got a crutch and a gourd. Hulu, yeah, I've been trying to remember that all week. He always has a hulu. You notice stuff coming out of it. Then you have the beautiful lady who has a long-stemmed lotus, and she's the only woman. Then you have the guy with the bare belly and the fan that dispenses gold coins, Dong Li Chuan. Then you have an old guy with a funny tube with 2 prongs sticking out of it. Now, what the hell is that? You'll find out soon. But that's the oldest one, Zhong Guo Lao. You recognize him because he's the oldest one. He's got a gray beard, and he's got this funny tube with the 2 prongs sticking out. Then you've got this guy with the funny ear flaps and clackers. Now, he doesn't always have clackers. Sometimes he has a tablet. But he's brother-in-law Zhao, who was a shirt-tail member of the Song Dynasty imperial family, got in trouble and left that all behind. And then you have the dancing, girlish kind of figure with a basket of flowers. That's Lan, into gardening, and is of unknown gender. She's non-binary. Oftentimes she looks like a young girl. And then you've got the flute player. His name is like playing the flute by the stream. And there's always one that's got to have a flute. Oh, first I want to go back to these 2 things, which was the first thing that I found in regard to the trigrams and the immortals. And you can see it's before heaven and after heaven. And I finally understood a little bit about what the difference is. And I think maybe I'll say that before we go through them in detail. But you can see that the people who did this diagram have little pictures of each of the immortals with their signature. Like the crutch and the gourd. And those ones that I just went through, they're consistent with all of these. So when you look at these, you can immediately recognize who they are. First I'm going to look at this. And I finally realized, and I could be completely wrong about this, But the before heaven arrangement of the trigrams has to do with the changing of yang to yin, or like the vertical axis, the day, this big circle that goes like that. But they say it's about the world we come from, the more perfect world, world before manifestation, where things are different and fucked up in some weird way. And the other arrangement has to do with the surface, has to do with the directions on the surface. So one is vertical and one is horizontal, and that's really kind of the difference between them energetically. The one, of course, before heaven makes a whole lot more sense, because you can see the progression of I should go back and go over the whole idea of trigrams. You've got existence before polarity, before yin-yang, which to me is hypothetical, and I have no direct experience with it. I think it sounds nice, but everything I've ever experienced is yin-yang. Has dark and shadow, has things going up, things coming down, has this movement between these two poles. And in Chinese thought, they represent the ascending pole of light as yang with one bar, and the descending pole of darkness with a broken. So as you can see on that, the solid one is yang, the broken one is yin. So then everything is not just yin and yang. There are different degrees of change in how yin and yang change. In terms of dividing the changes up into four, you've got Tai-yang. Now I think this is wrong. You may know better than me, Kendra, but I think these next two are wrong. I think they should be Xiao-yang and Xiao-yin.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Because the base line defines the essential, the deepest nature of the trigram. So you've got 3 yang trigrams and 3 yin trigrams, right? You see the lines up top. And so I think these should be reversed in terms of what they call them. But basically you've got pure yang, you've got yang that has yin within it, and you have yin that has yang within it, and then you have pure yin. And then you add the next layer, which gives 8. And then of course you take that times 8 to get the 64 changes of the I Ching. So it's all based around these. And to understand the 64 hexagrams, you have to have an understanding of the basic meaning of each of the trigrams. And they have a consistent meaning that is kind of weird and vague, but you can learn oftentimes through tables of correspondences, and I'll show you one of those. See, you've got 3 broken lines at the bottom, which is earth, which is kun, which is receptive, which is the most yin, and then you've got 2 yin and 1 yang, which is mountain, and you look at it and it reminds you of a mountain, because it's, something solid up high, and who knows what's inside the mountain. And it has a meaning kind of like that, which is like, it's not moving, it's still, but it's very solid. Right. And that's the idea of it, the change of keeping still. Then you have a broken line on the bottom and a broken line on the top, so it's essentially a yin trigram, but inside is a yang line. That's water, which appears very yin, is essentially very yin, but there's some force inside it that's very yang. It's danger, it's the abyss, it's the deep. In Chinese internal alchemy cosmology, one of the basic things that is being attempted to bring fire that's up down into the belly where there's water, which is down, and likewise water up, and change each of the lines. The fire gives the water the middle yang, the middle yin line, and the water gives fire the middle yang line, and then they're heaven and earth, they're perfected. Yeah. Aphorism that's given, and you're supposed to figure out what to do with that.
Right.
but it actually is kind of represented in the difference between the two hexagrams, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you've got 1 yin and 2 yang, which is wind. At its base, it's more empty and flowing than solid, and wind is gentle but penetrating. Then you have thunder, 1 yang line at the bottom and then 2 yin lines at the top. You know, it's this force that you can't really see. It's just sound, but it's really energizing. Its basic energy is to like stir things up and get things moving. Then you've got a solid line on top, a solid line on the bottom, but in the middle is a broken line, which is fire, which is much more yang than water, but it still is, there's a still yin quality to it inside. Then you have lake, which is like a mountain, like Crater Lake. You know, you've got 2 yang lines and then the top of yin line. It's like you climb to the top of a mountain and there's a lake and everything's beautiful and there's joy. And then you have heaven. You have 3 solid lines. You have the higher, you have all yang energy, which is like creative. In this, the before heaven arrangement, you see that you've got a Tai Chi, which is basically the movement of light to dark and dark to light. And you've got a line through the middle of the side dividing the yin half from the yang half. It makes much more sense than the other. And in the yang half, it starts with 1 yang and 2 yin. Then it goes 2 yang but a yin in the middle. Then you goes 2 yang on the bottom and a yin in the middle, and then 3 yang. And then the reverse on the other side. Total sense. So why is it so damn different here? I'm not sure why. This is the after heaven. It is set up according to the nature of the directions, which have a particular quality of energy in and of themselves that I am theoretically proposing may have to do with the trigrams of that direction. So you've got south is fire, is always hot, geographically generally true in the northern latitudes, and north is water, north is cold. Now why you have, the biggest problem we all have, aside from the fact that we have 12, is the fact that we read maps upside down. And it's very, very hard to totally rotate and have up be south and down be north, and east be left and west be right on a horizontal surface. It still screws me up. Total yin, earth, is in the southwest, that being that direction, right? Total heaven, 3 solid, is in the northwest. I don't know whether you guys have any sense of those directions having those kinds of energies. I don't know. But I do kind of see wind coming from the west and thunder coming from the east. That's the starting point. At least you get the idea what the difference between the 2 bakwas are. So then, now I don't know exactly what order they're traditionally put in, but I've several times seen them in this order, so I'm going to go with this. Ludong Ben is generally considered to be their leader, but the fact is there are a couple of guys who are older than him and have better credentials, and I don't think he's really the leader. I think he's the one that has the major contact with people, because he is the transmitter of Nedong, internal alchemy. Everybody always quotes him, even though he learned it from Zhong Chuan Li. But still, he's the one that teaches it. Even all the other immortals, he has taught them the exercises that bring about immortality. And the fact that that's a requirement interested me, that there are certain practices. It doesn't matter where you come from. Your circumstances don't matter nearly so much as if you have help from an immortal and you have the right exercises to practice. That seems to be the big basic requirement to attain immortality. You all know the story of Ludong Ben, right? The root story is the yellow millet tree, and you'll see a reference to that in a lot of Taoist text, and everybody's supposed to know the whole story behind that. Lu Dongbin was an aspiring official. He got a really good education, and every year that it was open went to take the imperial exam and flunked it. Why, it's hard to know. A lot of times it was rigged, you know, but it was the only way to become an official was to take that exam and pass it, and he kept going and flunking and trying again. And then, by some sources, he was like 64, going to do it one more time, and he happens into a tavern. He's a little tired from the journey, and he orders a bowl of yellow melon cooked for him so he can relax and have something to eat, and he falls asleep. In that sleep, he has a dream that he passes the imperial exam. He gets appointed to being prime minister. He's married to the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. He has beautiful kids. And then some bullshit happens and he gets involved in a scandal and he gets thrown out of office, and his wife leaves him for his best friends, and the kids die in the street, and his life is a total disaster. And then he wakes up and he realizes, I'm not sure even if I got this life I would want it. Because that's kind of the way it goes, whether you like it or not. And so the waiter, who was Zhongli Chuang in disguise, who was like this fat old guy that carries a fan, and he had wrote a poem on the wall, agreed to take him on and teach him the secrets of being done. And that's how, and Zhongli Chuang, he was an immortal since like the 4th, 5th century, you know, early on, but he was like, retired, you know, he was not really into he liked to drink, he liked to write poetry, you know, and he liked to dispense gold with his fan, but Lu Dongbin was much more into being actively helping humanity, for sure. So he always carries a demon's sword. He's the only one that has a sword. The tradition of Taoists carrying swords really is modeled on the image of Lu Dongbin. In the before heaven, Bakwa, he's thunder, he's Jun, he's like the starting yang force. Whereas in the after heaven, Bakwa, he's Dui, he's lake. He's in the west, he's like the joy of leaving world of trying to make it and heading west where there's magic, and you can learn how to poke demons with swords. There's a line that you hear a lot in Chinese, apparently, which essentially means the dog bit Lu Dongbin. And it basically means, in Chinese right there, literally it's dog bites Lu Dongbin, not no good man's heart. It's the idea that, yeah, it's very, very difficult to recognize levels. You know, you really don't know how conscious or immortal anybody is. It's like a dog not knowing the difference between Lu Dongbin, who is an immortal benefactor of humanity, and just an ordinary guy. It's like you have to have the right level of consciousness to see it, but it's a tragedy when the dog bites Lu Dongbin. Sometimes he has a fly whisk, and sometimes not, but that's generally a symbol of a Taoist immortal anyway. The one I'm most identified with now is Iron Crutch Li. His story was that he was a prodigy. He was very good looking and handsome and accomplished guy who got immortality fairly young. And he used to go on astral visits in different places and leave his body in charge of his disciple. And he told his disciple, if I'm not back in 7 days, well, I've gotten caught in the spirit world and killed, and you might as well burn my body. But problem was that at 6 days, word was sent that his disciple's mother was dying.
Oh, no.
And he had to go. You have to go to your dying mother's deathbed. So he says, 6 days, he's probably dead, and he burns the body. So the guy comes back, and apparently one of the parts of immortality is that, at least physical mortality is you just have one body and you have to keep it up. You know, you can't just manufacture one out of nothing. So he looks around and he sees an alcoholic beggar who has just died, but there's enough life in his body that he can take it over. So he's a really accomplished guy, but he's got this really fucked up body.
Gotcha.
That's not really his,
Yeah.
and that is very uncomfortable, and that makes him irritable and irrational, a little bit crazy, and an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Also crippled. Guy's got a totally fucked up leg. Now, he also has internal alchemy practices, so he can make that body work with the help of a special iron crutch that's given to him by Lao Tzu himself, apparently, with which he can cure anything, even bring back the dead if they're recently dead. So I feel more in common with him than all the rest. I have never felt that this was a legitimate body. I felt I deserved something much more functional than this. This, by its just it's like being used to driving a fairly decent car and having to get into a jalopy and maneuver around. I've never felt comfortable in this, and it has to do with just the genetics of this particular body. And I also was lame at a very young age and can't really walk for long distances without a cane. And so I understand kind of how you got to work with a body that's seriously messed up, and not really yours, or not really what you developed, through lifetimes of work. One thing that I've learned, I maybe should have learned it long ago, is that Chinese last names often don't mean anything. They're just sounds, even though the character itself might have originally had a meaning. But it's like, say, Wong. Wong is the character for king. And there are a billion Wongs in China. They don't think of themselves, they don't make that association with king and their name that much. It's there, you can see it. And names are, I think educated people oftentimes know the origin of their names, but generally they're just a sound. Li, of course, is the family name of Wang Shifu, Li Daoren, or Li Jia, or always smiling Li. And people are oftentimes more called by their last name, even though it's a family name that doesn't really mean anything. And if you'll notice, each of the immortals has a different last name, which I think is interesting. It emphasizes that it's not a family clan, and that it's coming from all the different 100 names. Considered to be mentally disturbed. But he's the one that's most associated with medicine. And then you have the immortal girl, He, the only woman. She almost always, well, I think always, you can't see it in the wood one, but you see it's a long stemmed lotus, a single large bloom on a long stem. And that, and being a woman, are the things that identify her. She's said to be the only woman, though it's questionable in terms of Lawn, the flower girl. But sometimes she's on a spotted deer. And I'm not exactly sure what her superpower is, other than being a beautiful woman, which is a kind of superpower. And the essence of yin. In both bakwas, she has the kun, the earth trigram, which I think is interesting.
It doesn't change like the other one did?
It changes position,
Okay.
but it does. Most of the other ones have two different trigrams in different positions. And it's, I think, it's a key to understanding their real meaning if you understand why. And I think this is one of the clues: is that she, the only feminine character, has both the kun trigrams. And she's the only one that has the actual word Shin, immortal, in her name. Which is like, well, you don't believe a girl could be immortal? This one is. This, of course, is the one that I admire most.
Makes me happy.
He's very happy. He spends a lot of his time in taverns, and he doesn't bother that much about clothing. And he has a large belly, and it's always exposed. And you notice he has a mug or a gourd, and he's always drinking, and he likes poetry a lot. He also has a fly whisk sometimes. And he has this fan that's sometimes said to be made out of cattails and different things it's made from, but it's a magic fan that can cause life or death or distribute gold. But he was a famous general in the Han Dynasty, and assigned to go take out the Tibetans. So he goes to Tibet with a whole army, and they get wiped out. So he's not a success as a general, and it's a big disappointment when you have a band of brothers, people you've grown up with and trained, and you've led them into a situation where they're killed. Li Jia, Wong's teacher, had that same situation. I've always, guys like that have oftentimes always made a big turn in terms of, you have that big of a disaster where people get killed because of your stupidity. That could really shift something. So he quit being a general and went and lived in a cave for a long time and did internal practices and became an immortal and has not that much interest in politics. That's why he lets Lu Dunbin kind of run things. In the famous China trips, you've heard about the China trips. In looking at the immortals and people involved, Heiner really is Lu Dunbin. Heiner was the one who was the translator and who did the teaching for the most part. Wang was like Zheng Di Chuan. He was the source. And if he didn't feel like getting up for Qigong, he wouldn't get up for Qigong. And he drank tea and talked a lot. Went home early and just did what he felt like. He's retired, basically. But he is where it all came from. And then there's the drunken guy with a cane that is a little bit unbalanced. That feels he was an important functionary, like the Iron Crutch. He was essentially the trip doctor, and that's where he learned how to do acute kind of treatments for colds and stuff. Now this guy I've gotten very fond of. Do you know anything about him? He's the oldest, and he's the one who basically is the master of living a long time. And generally he rides a donkey facing backward because he's more interested in where he's been than where he's going. The funniest thing is he always, and they're different, sometimes he's on a donkey, sometimes not, but he always has this tubey thing with these two prongs sticking out of the top of it. In every one, and different symbols are different, but this one is consistent with him. And I couldn't figure out what it was until, of course, I went to the Wikipedia. And it said that it was a fish skin drum. Well, what the heck is a fish skin drum, and why does it have two little ears sticking out? I found this, it seemed like a really obscure thing. This isn't just an old instrument. This is a genre of performance art that's very old and was hugely popular probably up until the Revolution. And everybody in the 19th century probably immediately knows what a fish skin drum is, and that it is not just an instrument, but it's this whole performance genre.
将如酒，将恩不报啊，你反为仇。昔日探望去不山咯，老日那黄秋战术为殿，黄秋有比公胆大呀。大胆之人，一夫为残，不服的是鬼呀山内断咯。由于那古今八路拦呐，猎人逮夫滚下了井咯。古今有比那黄土田呐，黄土上面生那青内草哦，青草有比这老牛为残，将牛卖与这杀牛汉，杀牛的个汉子他丢进了钱，看来一包还一包。
See the name there? Zheng Gou Lao. That's our guy. He is the patron of this art form.
Amazing.
And it was like, well, you think 10% of the Chinese population could read. 90% were not stupid. And they had an incredibly rich culture. And a lot of it was transmitted by people who sang stories using very simple instruments, basically percussion, and knew all the history of, you know, in rhyme and story form of the culture. And, you know, some old guy, you know, goes from town to town on a donkey and sings songs, you know, that conveys eternal Taoist truths, you know, as well as fun story. The whole idea of using a combination of rhythm and a narration or a verbal direction, I think, for me, is the most basic longevity practice that I've encountered. And this is the guy who is the expert. And I realized that I learned shaking to the beat of a drum in the movements of the Gurdjieff movements, where we did this, where you're bouncing up and down, and these were dervish practices, and getting in tune with your center by bouncing up and down. It was like a exercise you did in a group. And then in the Rajneesh ashram, it was like conga drum and shaking, you know, basically all different kinds of percussion to this particular shaking exercise. And then with Wong, and the exercises that he gave us during shaking practice are a compilation and a distillation of a whole lot of different Taoist practices that are at the root of internal alchemy. Really, I was just reading this book, you know, that supposedly came from Guanjin masters, and these exercises are all done absolutely sitting.
Oh, nice.
In a lotus position with your spine straight for hours at a time, doing these internal practices. Now, how did I happen on the good fortune of having someone who taught me these while doing shaking, which I could do. I could never do them sitting.
Right.
But these those practices are they're a fairly significant, deep root exercise for Taoist practice. And my guess is it was originally taught with somebody with a drum who knew how to create a rhythm and do the visualization to people shaking in time to the rhythm. That's my fantasy about this particular immortal anyway.
Yeah. Why don't we have drums with the Innu and Qigong?
Who knows how to play them? Heiner tried it one year. I remember that. There was a hippie guy with a drum that went, I could do drums, and I said, sure, go ahead. the guy wouldn't do Heiner's rhythm.
Oh.
The guy would do his own, you know, what he thought the rhythm ought to be.
Oh, no.
Drove kind of crazy. And I've always, you know, I've always followed a rhythm and tried to set a rhythm and feel it as a steady beat that people could tune into, which I kind of developed over time. It wasn't necessarily always done that way. In China, people just kind of shake randomly. But I realize I have like 50 years of shaking training behind me, and I do think it's the secret of the fact that I have survived past when I was supposed to die. I think it is the root longevity practice.
Wow.
One thing I think is interesting is that his trigram in Before Heaven is Qian, is heaven, at the very top, at the Taiyong place. And in the After Heaven, he's in the he's in the water spot. He's in the spot of danger, but that water is the root of where practice starts.
The country inland.
Yeah, he's kind of interesting. I told you his story in terms of how he became a Taoist immortal. You can tell him by his hat, which always has these flaps on it. You can't see it in the wood one so much because his head's turned back. So he always has this hat, and that's some sort of an imperial insignia. And that's his thing. And that's what they use him for occasionally, because he was a member of the imperial family, and that alone has a great deal of cachet in China to get you into a lot of places. And they apparently use him for that occasion. And he was like just a brother-in-law to the empress or something like that, you know. He wasn't a real member of the imperial family, but close enough so that he had the prestige and the dress and the look and could walk around like he was a member. But he had a brother who was a faka, and took advantage of the name and the fact that he was in the imperial family and did all kinds of bad stuff. And there's one really bad story. The second time, though, he got the message and realized there's maybe something wrong with this kind of official behavior.
Yeah.
And
Maybe. Maybe.
and I don't know whether he ratted out his brother or whatever, but his brother got whacked, got executed, and he left town and went and meditated in a cave and practiced Taoist practices and renounced official position, and was visited by Lu Dongben, who taught him exercises so that he's the fanciest looking, you know, of them. Now he's pictured. Sometimes he's pictured with a tablet, which is like these official tablets that they give you that mean you're an imperial family, and it'll get you into anywhere and protect you, you know. But more often he has clackers. You see those clackers? So I have another fun video of the genre of clackers in classical Chinese culture.
I hope it has cool singing.
It does. This is a lady who's giving a lecture on all the different old Chinese instruments. So she's
A
introducing
type of
the
clapper called kuaiban, or fast clappers. There are two separate sets of clappers. The larger has 2 bars, and the smaller has 5 bars, one facing the other 4. Each set is connected with twine, and Chinese coins were put in between the 4 small bars. Kuaiban are used for a storytelling tradition called kuaiban shu, or fast clever narration. I have invited Dr. Jian Wells, a distinguished linguist and scholar in Chinese literature, to perform a kuaiban shu piece. Dr. Wells has been performing kuaiban for decades. He often refers to this art form as Chinese rap.
昨天晚上闹嘈嘈响 金银角. Big commotion late last night, thinking about money. Couldn't sleep tight, so I grabbed a spade and I headed south, and I found a spot way out of sight, and I dug there all my might. Who would have guessed? I dug right into a treasure chest. Coins of silver, coins of gold, diamonds, baskets. Now where am I gonna stash all this loot? It's so dangerous and around rotten buildings they burn down.
I wonder if he has a girlfriend.
He's an American Chinese professor.
Wrong, how wrong could I be? My iron-handled walking stick is gold enough for me.
Thank you for tuning in.
He's mastered the
谢谢
tradition.
再见。
How many nerds do you know that would go to China to use how to do tell rhyming poems using clackers?
Yeah.
And why would that be the art form of this
Yeah.
fallen official? I don't understand it. Though there appears to me to be some consistency, and they're all kind of into music. All of them, most of them, Liu Dongbin and Zhuangli Chuan both just do poetry. But poetry in classical Chinese was sung as well. So, and then there's the flute player,
Right.
and then there's the girl with the flower basket whose art form is stomp dancing.
Oh.
Do you know about stomp
Yeah.
dancing?
Yeah.
You do?
Some, yeah.
Yeah. It's the same kind of deal, rhythm done to stomping, telling stories. They are all transmitters of popular entertainment for the masses, even though they're immortals. This is how they interact with us, and it would appear to me oftentimes with music and dance and
Makes sense.
performance
Yeah.
with crude instruments.
Do you have a stomp dancing video?
I don't. I looked for one.
Oh.
Stomp is like a Broadway show.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah.
internet is stuffed with that kind of stuff. So it looks like to me they all do something performance-wise, and oftentimes musical. And most often musical. Okay, I think I'm past my time.
What about the other ones?
Until next time.
Okay.
I can do a quick.
Anyway.
So then that's the flower girl, and that's the flute player. This is where I got them from.
Nice.
I started looking for, and there's a wide range. The most common, and I saw this one on many of the websites. This is really pretty good, right? For $390. And then there was this one, which is what I've taken my models off of. Well, you've seen them, they're actually pretty nice. But $522.
Ooh, yeah.
So, would you pay?
No.
You wouldn't.
Well, you're asking the wrong people. We're
We're
all
yeah,
like, we're
deeply
students.
in debt.
Well, I did a lot of research on how to act, because I do really believe that effigies can be useful and effective in terms of hooking up with different forces.
Yeah.
So I thought I would, since I passed on the $200 Japanese bone ones, I thought I would see what was there.
You're backlit.
Thank you. Is that better?
So do you feel like you need a statue of them in order to invoke them?
No, I don't think it's a necessity to have a statue. I just think it's helpful. Just like it's helpful to have somebody leading you in a Qigong class. When you start out, you've got a little bit more energy. Particularly if it's done by someone who put attention into it. And anything that's handmade and well crafted,
Yeah.
that somebody put a lot of attention into thinking of this character has that kind of force. At least that's been my experience. That's why my house is full of this kind of junk.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, if you look closely, what it says up here, this item is out of stock. And this other one, you know, there are dozens of these, and their prices range from $400 to $600, but not less than $400. They're all boxwood, and there are like 4 or 5 websites that have these that look identical to this, but only this website
Is that?
had ones that looked identical to this. And what it said was, old. So, old. Now, that has a very definite meaning in Chinese business. It means it's not antique, which is a good thing.
Oh.
You cannot get antiques out of China. It's illegal. They would put you in jail.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so old is better. Old means that, it was after revolution. They think of, it's gotta be more than 100 years old to be antique. But old can be, and the fact is, a lot of stuff that was made in the 40s and 50s was by old traditions and was really very, very good craftsmanship.
That's beautiful.
But it's
It's on sale though.
it was on sale. It was like it was reduced from $600 to $522.
Oh,
But it's out of stock now. It's too late. You know why it's out of stock? It's because it's on its way to me.
Oh, yeah. There it is.
I thought this is the only one I've seen like this.
Yeah.
And they're all in $400, $500, $600 range. But this is the only one I've seen like this, and I think it's genuinely old. It has some patina. So I thought, what the hell? I'll make him an offer. So I stuck in $470.
Oh, nice.
And they had me take my PayPal information. They said, get back to me. And damned if they didn't sell it to me for $470.
right on.
It won't be here till the end of February, but all of these beautiful
Yeah.
statues
Nice
are
job.
going to be on my piano
Wow.
for us to be able to connect with that particular power.
So cool.
Beautiful.
Okay, end of lecture.